Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to welcome all of you to this meeting arranged and the webinar arranged by the Center for Islamic Research in Africa. Thank you for joining us, those who are in South Africa on a very cold evening. And we would like to also thank our guest who's joining us from abroad. I think that this particular discussion on Mali and the developments in the Sahel region is really poignant at a time like this. We meet at a critical juncture for the Sahel. Mali, once hailed as a model of West African democracy, now finds itself at the epicenter of a multifaceted crisis that defies simple narratives. A military junta clings to power amid spiraling insecurity. Armed groups contest territorial control. Regional alliances are fracturing, and the civilian population bears the staggering cost. What makes this moment particularly urgent is the April 2026 offensive launched by Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin and the Azawad Liberation Front against the junta. A development that has reshuffled the deck. It's raised fundamental questions about sovereignty, legitimacy, and the future of the entire Sahel region. Our speaker today, Anwar Mafil, brings a perspective that is both analytically rigorous and deeply attuned to the human dimensions of this conflict. He will help us move beyond headlines to understand the historical fault lines, the shifting alliances, and the stakes for Mali and beyond. But before we hear from Anwar, I want to invite each of you to bring your own critical lens to this conversation. The crisis in Mali is not a story that can be told from a single vantage point, and your engagement in this discussion will be essential. So I want to pose a few provocative questions to let you sit with it as you listen to Anwar, and perhaps reflect on it after that through your questions and comments. When a military junta justifies its rule by citing security failures of elected governments, yet presides over a dramatic escalation of violence, what does that tell us about the relationship between military governance and stability in the Sahel? JNIM and the FLA have launched a joint offensive against the junta. One is considered a Salafi jihadist organization with regional ambitions. The other is considered an independent movement rooted in Tuareg grievances. What does this tactical convergence reveal about the nature of alliances in this conflict? And should we expect that alliance to hold? One of the big questions that I've seen on social media is, will that alliance deliver on something similar to what we've seen in Syria? The current crisis is shaped by decades of post-colonial marginalization, failed peace agreements, and the unresolved question of the Azawad. How does our understanding of the present shift when we take the long view of Malian history? From French military involvement to the Wagner Group's presence and the withdrawal of MINUSMA, foreign actors have profoundly shaped Mali's trajectory. Are the external forces part of the solution, or are they part of the problem, or simply a reflection of Mali's own governance vacuum? The developments in Mali have already reverberated through Burkina Faso, Niger, and the rest of the Sahel. The AU does not recognize unconstitutional changes of government, and ECOWAS has also dug their heels in. While these countries have formulated the Alliance of Sahel States, what does this mean for Africa as a continent? So with that, allow me to introduce our esteemed guest. Anwar Mafil is the director for the Ramla Center for Dialogue, an independent non-profit organization committed to promoting peace and reconciliation through dialogue, mediation, and education, particularly within the Muslim world. The name Ramla is a reference to the medieval city established by the Umayyads in the Levant and recalls the Treaty of Ramla, a landmark agreement that ended the Third Crusade. Signed by Salahuddin al-Ayyubi and Richard the Lionheart, the treaty laid the foundation for diplomatic engagement between the Muslim world and the West. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Anwar. And I must apologize, I didn't introduce myself adequately. My name is Zeenat Adam. I'm a former diplomat and a political analyst. So welcome, Anwar.
The news cycle often does not allow certain conflicts to have the space they deserve. And Mali certainly is one of those. It's a conflict which has been going on for over a decade now. Yet it has received little coverage, at least in the English-speaking language. Up until a couple of weeks ago, with a massive attack launched by two of the main armed groups in the region, JNIM and the FLA, which really has sent shockwaves into the region and those that observe the region. So to understand the current situation, we first need to go back a little bit into the past and understand some of the root causes of the conflict, and a bit about the history of the region and Mali in particular, which cannot be divorced from the rest of the region of the Sahel. So Mali, of course, is situated in West Africa. It's a country which is almost exclusively Muslim. The entire population shares the same religion. They're Sunni Muslims. They follow the Maliki madhab. But it's an extremely diverse country ethnically. So we have a range of different ethnicities, distributed between the north and the south. We've got in the north, we've got the Tuareg, we've got the Berbers, we've got the Arabs. In the center of the country, we've got the Fulanis. In the south, we've got the Bambaras, and many others. So, in particular, the name Azawad has resurfaced in the past couple of weeks and months. So when we talk about Azawad, it's essentially the northern part of the country, or the northern half of the country, which is the traditional homeland of especially Tuareg people. Now, the people are a nation or ethnicity which spills obviously into current day Mali, but also Niger, Algeria, Libya, and Burkina Faso. So this region today is contested. It's actually an old dispute, which has very often started with the partition of countries, of ethnicities and tribes in the region and beyond. So the borders of modern Mali were drawn by the French colonizers. The French. Sorry, I'm going to keep my camera off. I've been having connection issues. I was explaining that the French colonizers focused on the fertile south, where they built infrastructures, and very much neglected the north, which was the homeland of nomadic Tuaregs, Arabs, and other Berbers. Now, this dynamic continued after independence, where the political and military power became highly centralized in the south, where the capital is Bamako. And over time, you can say that the Bambara culture and language became the de facto identity of the Malian state. Now, that left the northern populations, which were, as I've mentioned, of different ethnicity and background, feeling like neglected and ignored, and having a little stake into modern Mali. So successive governments in Bamako have almost systematically underinvested into the northern regions. There's a severe lack of roads, schools, hospitals, opportunities, leading to feelings of deliberate abandonment. And there's also many Tuaregs and Arabs have reported facing pervasive racial profiling in the south, harassment and discrimination, and being treated as foreigners in the country. the Malian military is also mostly composed of southern ethnic groups and has frequently engaged into brutal crackdowns and that violation of human rights have been documented, such as extrajudicial killings, torture, poisoning of wells, and collective punishment in the northern regions. So all of that is something which has been ongoing, which existed prior to colonization and which was exacerbated by colonization and which was even reinforced after independence. So it's in that context that an independence movement among the Tuareg people started to emerge as early as the early 1900s. And when French colonizers exited Mali in the 1960s, that demand for Tuareg independence intensified. So in 1962, the first Tuareg rebellion took place. Tuareg attacked government positions in northern Mali and in uncoordinated offensives. That rebellion was crushed in 1962, forcing many civilians to flee into neighboring countries and causing or reinforcing a resentment which was already present. On top of this, several droughts in the north killed livestock and severely affected the nomadic lifestyle of the populations then. So the sentiment continued. In 1990, the Tuareg rebels attacked again from northern Niger. The groups in Mali, in particular the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, the NPLA, founded by Iyad Agrali, a very important figure, and we'll get back to him, and other Tuareg groups. So eventually, a peace deal was struck between the central government and the Tuareg rebels in 1995, even though attacks continued sporadically in northern Mali. So that's the context, the terrain, post-colonization in a country which is one of the poorest countries in the world, facing numerous challenges. One of them being this ethnic divide within the country, within borders which were drew without consideration for the ethnicities, the tribes, and the feelings of the local populations. Now, fast forward in 2012, a coalition of armed insurgents rapidly took over northern Mali. Now, the main groups involved at the time were Ansaruddin, led by Iyad Agrali. Iyad Agrali is the historical kind of founding father of the Tuareg rebellion. Okay, among those groups were also Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the Mujawo, the Movement for the Oneness and Jihad in West Africa, as well as more nationalist groups, especially the MNLA, the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad. So the MNLA was mainly made up of Tuareg fighters who had served in Libya under Muammar al-Gaddafi, and after his fall returned to Mali. So we've got this kind of broad coalition of groups, some being Islamic armed groups, some being more nationalist Tuareg groups, kind of all marching together and sending shockwaves and taking the entire over half of the country. Now, very rapidly, this coalition kind of collapsed. Even though in 2012, the MNLA, Ansaruddin, and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb publicly announced a pact to constitute an Islamic Republic of Azawad. Okay, so you can see how the initial feeling of demands for independence of homeland for the Tuareg people kind of merged with wider demands for more, number one, more Islamic Mali in terms of governance, but also more fair and more diverse representation. This coalition, as I mentioned, rapidly collapsed, and the MNLA, the kind of opposed the harsh implementation of the Sharia and demanded a secular state. At the same time, there is numerous abuses by the MNLA over the population, which led to resentment. And the MNLA was eventually chased and expelled by the coalition of Islamic groups. Now, this takeover in 2012 led to the former colonizer, France, which retained an interest and still felt and feels that West Africa is part of its sphere of influence. And as a result, France invaded Mali. And in cooperation with the Malian army. So we saw the deployment of 4,500 French soldiers, as well as 14,000 soldiers acting on behalf of the UN, and several battalions from neighboring countries under the G5 joint mission. So despite the investment in military efforts, they proved to be completely counterproductive, and the insurgents, even though they left the major cities, not only remain strong, but they managed to reach beyond the initial territory of northern Mali, and they launched numerous attacks, not only in Mali, but also in the south, in the capital of Bamako, so beyond the northern Mali. They also expanded to central Mali, where the Katiba Masina, led by Amadou Koufa. So I was explaining that the military intervention by the former colonial power reignited and fueled ethnic tensions in the region, with the rise of self-styled auto-defense militias backed by the central government, which committed numerous crimes and massacres, predominantly against Fulanis, at the hands of Dogons and Bambara militias, who, and several observers have pointed that the Malian government, at least some of its members, had a role in financing and providing logistical support to these militias. So eventually, in 2015, we saw the Algiers Accords. So elements of the initial rebellion, of the Tuareg rebellion, namely the MNLA, the Movement for the National Liberation of Azawad, entered into a series of negotiations facilitated by Algeria with the Malian government. But those negotiations and this dialogue excluded some of the most important groups in the region, which were holding power, i.e. Ansar al-Din, Al-Qaeda, and the Mujahid. So they were labeled terrorists, and they were seen as purely military targets. So this accord essentially made some promises to the Tuaregs for more autonomy in exchange for them laying their arms. This accord, or this agreement, was short-lived and quickly collapsed, and eventually the central government denounced this agreement and labeled the Tuareg movement as terrorist, which eventually led them to rejoin the other Islamic groups, which they had previously left. Another key development in 2017 is the birth of Jamaat al-Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, or short for JNIM, the group of support to Islam and the Muslims. Now, as I've mentioned, the groups operating in the region were a multitude of groups, deeply rooted in local tribes and local power breakers. Now, these groups all merged into one, pledged their allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and to the Taliban, and proclaim this new group called the JNIM. The leader of the JNIM is Iyad Agrali. So the man seen as a forefather for the Tuareg cause became the leader of this group, which became a branch of Al-Qaeda. Now, almost at the same time, another actor emerged on the scene. In 2016, the Islamic State, at that time led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, accepted the pledge of allegiance of a local branch, and we saw the emergence of the Islamic State in West Africa. Now, the JNIM continue to grow, continue to gain acceptance within the local population, mainly because of the French intervention, because of the corruption of the central government, because of the discrimination towards the northern regions and the central regions, and for the kind of demands for Islamic governance. Now, what's interesting is very early on, the JNIM, as early as 2019, expressed that they were very open to negotiating and opening a dialogue with the central government, as long as France left the country, which eventually happened. So even though we have a group which was a branch of Al-Qaeda, we saw that there were perspectives for dialogue and reconciliation. Now, the involvement of France did not last. In 2020, the military again seized power in Bamako, promising to end the crisis. France and other parties condemned the coup, and causing the stance of the new military junta to harden against France. There was also popular anger towards France, the former colonizer, and its presence in the country. And eventually in 2021, the French troops and the UN were asked to withdraw from Mali by the military junta, which by then had pivoted and passed some security agreements with Russia, and had almost invited Russian mercenaries from the Wagner group. So here's a very important point, is that France withdrew from the country and from the conflict entirely by 2021. So this was, of course, seen as a major victory for the JNIM. After a decade of conflict, France withdrew. But this was also a major geopolitical shift in the region, as we saw the local regimes previously aligned to the former colonizer France pivoting to Russia. Now, the involvement of Russia is quite different from the relationship with France. One of them being that France was paying for its own costs, military cost. The agreement struck between Mali, the central government, and Russia, the Wagner group, was that Mali was paying for it. So a key issue is that the Wagner mercenaries continue to, as we've witnessed in other parts of the world, committing massacres and crimes against local populations, which really exacerbated the resentment towards the central government and led more and more people to align, if not join, with the JNIM. So in 2026, and we're coming to April, just 2 months ago, the regime launched an unprecedented nationwide assault. So not only on the cities of the north of Kidal, Gao, but also Sevare, Bamako, and Kati, all the way down to the south. So in that, it was a display of force. In that assault, the Minister of Defense was actually killed. He was one of the most influential pro-Russian voice in the country. He was killed in his house. The head of domestic intelligence service was severely injured, and rumors were that he had died. And the president, Goita, disappeared for several days. So most importantly, the regime lost Kidal, which is seen as the capital of the Tuareg homeland. And something which is to be noted is that the Russian African Corps, which is the rebrand for Wagner, and the Malian army were forced to negotiate a retreat with the regime. And they did so, and they retreated, quote unquote, peacefully. Hundreds of regime soldiers were taken as prisoners and later released. But a very important point is that the attack was a result of a partnership between the regime and the ALF, the Azawad Liberation Movement, which is kind of a rebranding of the Tuareg separatist movement, which had previously clashed with regime all the way to 2024. So in 2024, these two groups signed a pact of non-aggression, and the key point of this pact of non-aggression was that the Azawad Liberation Movement, or the Front de Libération de l'Azawad, renounced its former secular demands and agreed for the application of the Sharia on the condition that it is not implemented harshly, as it was done in 2012. And the regime agreed that any Islamic judges would be appointed to administer Sharia must be mutually accepted by the two groups and vetted by all movements and accepted by the people. So to avoid infighting that destroyed this previous alliance, the two groups also mapped out a division of kind of administrative labor for the newly captured territories. Now, and just to conclude, and we can probably move to the Q&A, as there's a lot to discuss, is that the recent alliance between the regime and the ALF highlights the limitation of the military approach to Mali's conflict. By shifting the balance of power, this attack of April 2026 has left the military junta severely weakened. Its reliance on Russia has proven ineffective, while regime's strategy of building a strong base to bolster its local support and opening up dialogue with numerous domestic and international actors has made it more relevant than ever. So, inshallah, we can proceed to have a discussion, questions, answers, and comments if there's any.
Shukran jazilan, Brother Anwar. I think that you've given us a very powerful security analysis of what's been happening in Mali, and how these developments have taken place over a number of years, what we're to expect from this current new alliance, and how that even formulated. So I think that it's left us with a lot to think about. I want to invite our audience to pose their questions. You're welcome to do so by raising your hand or by adding it into the chat, and we're happy to put those questions to Anwar. While we wait for some of those questions to come through, Brother Anwar, I wondered if you might be able to give us a little bit more insight on how this crisis is being experienced at grassroots or community level. What impact is it having on the ordinary people in Mali? If we can begin there, and then we'll prompt a few other questions as we move along.
Okay, thank you. So as I've mentioned, Mali is a divided country, is a divided nation. So people will experience it differently based on their location and based on their ethnicity. So the population in the south generally feels that there's an attack on the government. There's an attempt to divide the country, and the conflict is seen very much through the lenses of the war on terror and the fight against terrorism and separatism. Now, that's a generalization. Obviously, we can't speak on the name of everyone. In the north, which is made of population which have been alienated for the past century, the conflict is seen very much as a struggle for liberation, as a struggle for justice, as a struggle for fairness, and as a struggle for the kind of development of the legitimate aspirations of the population and their desire to live under Islamic governance and in a nation which accepts and recognizes all its elements beyond differences in ethnicities. So there has been very, very graphic and horrendous massacres in the north of Mali, perpetrated by militias, perpetrated by the regime, and perpetrated by Wagner against farmers, against villages, which were seen as sympathetic to the rebellion, which were mainly due to their ethnicities. So the Fulanis in particular have suffered a lot. So the conflict is experienced differently based on the location, the ethnicity, and the relationship to the regime.
I was saying that I was recognizing Uncle Ismail's hand up.
Thank you very much. Enver, thanks very much for a very insightful sort of presentation. Just two questions from my side. What is the role of other countries, say from the Middle East or North Africa? What is their involvement in this conflict? Because we see other players, for example, in the Sudanese conflict. Of course, there are sub-regional powers that are also involved in the conflict in one way or the other. And the second question is, I mean, from your analysis and your understanding, what is the military balance now between the army or the armed forces and these opposition groupings, and what's the likely scenario? Will there be a settlement, or will one side or the other win, or will the country fragment, as we've seen in Libya, and is probably likelihood in Sudan also? Will we see a breakup of the country? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anwar, over to you.
Thank you very much. So the role of other countries is a very good question. Now, I would say that one of the differences with other conflicts, namely Sudan and Libya, is that the main players are mainly regional. So we've got Mali, we've got Burkina Faso, we've got Niger, we've got Algeria, we've got Libya, and that's mainly because of the kind of the Tuaregs and other populations being spread across those countries. So the dynamics, like I said, are very much post-colonial. And as I've mentioned, France, which has lost like virtually all its influence in the conflict, and Russia. Russia has really been the key player, and maybe that's taking me to the second part of the question regarding the military balance of power, is that the Mali as well as Niger and Burkina Faso are virtually unable to sustain themselves and defend themselves militarily. So that's why they need the support and the protection of their Russian ally. On the opposite side, the JNIM and the FLA have built very, very strong local roots. They've recruited thousands of men, and they've really built their capacity, which we've seen in the April attack. So the balance of power is not in favor of the Mali government. And what we've seen is, which was very interesting, is that during the attack, the JNIM, as I've mentioned, entered into negotiation with the Russian kind of contractors that were present, and negotiated a retreat. In the PR and the communique, and they've also mentioned that they wanted Russia to withdraw from the conflict, and that they were hoping to balance relationships. So that takes us to the last part of the question, which is the perspective to end the conflict. I think everything is on the table, but there is possibilities for dialogue and negotiations. Reason being is that this has already started. There has been actors within the Malian government that have voiced the will to negotiate. Some of them have even traveled to meet the JNIM, and then they've negotiated prisoners' release, which the JNIM fulfilled their promise. There's also more like international perspective for dialogue. There's also numerous religious clerics which have voiced that will, that possibility, and so currently the blockage is more from the central government, which is not ready yet to concede legitimacy to the JNIM and to the Azawad movement. But I think it's a real perspective. I think, as we've seen in Afghanistan, there is a possibility for a negotiated end or settlement of conflict, and that's something that needs to be monitored. The Azawad movement is content, or would be content, for simply the independence of Azawad. The JNIM does not want actually the country to break up. They want the country to remain one under Islamic governance. So these are the kind of demands. But I think the key point is that dialogue is on the table.
Thank you, Anwar. I think there's a lot of similarities, as I mentioned in some of my opening remarks, that we've seen parallels to the Syria conflict and how that panned out. But particularly, I want to hone in on the role of Russia, the Wagner Group in Africa. We've seen their involvement of late into areas, not just in the Sahel region, but even Mozambique and other parts of the continent. However, their appetite for involvement on a heightened military style in the manner in which they got involved in Syria seems to be much less or at least recalculated in the case of Africa. And I'm wondering if you think that has anything to do with them being stretched due to the war in Ukraine. But while you're considering some of that, I think it would only be fair for me to raise the question that Abdullah Panjwani has raised in the chat, which is, are there distinct similarities of Mali conflict to other countries' situations, both past and present? Anwar?
Yes. So regarding Russia's military intervention, is an excellent point, and it's very true. So first of all is that Russia offered a kind of a better deal than France when it comes to security agreement. France was coming with a lot of demands of, democracy, human rights, and which were seen as kind of revival of the colonial power in the country. Now, Russia did not come with all these demands and offered kind of military protection. Now, the Russian involvement is actually quite limited. The Russian involvement is limited to try to maintain the kind of military junta in power. It's not necessarily to overtake and get rid of the Jinim and other groups, which is quite they failed several times. So it's not really on the table because, as I've mentioned, it's a deeply rooted group and movement. So it's not something which can be undone even with military might. It's something which is deeply rooted. It's almost a century old, and is backed by a larger part of the population. Now, with regards to similarities with other conflicts, yes, of course, there are. There are because it's very much a post-colonial conflict, which is rooted in the division of countries and ethnicities. Obviously, there's the role of Al Qaeda. So, as we've seen in Afghanistan, as we've seen in Syria, it's a transnational conflict with demands that pertain to Islamic governance. Now, the dynamics are very different to Syria because the terrain is very different. Mali, as I've mentioned, is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's the North Mali is virtually is mostly desert and then very arid terrain. Syria is situated, it's in the Middle East. It has a border with Israel, so the dynamics are quite different. But yes, similarities that you have an Islamic group which has found local legitimacy, which is challenging the local regime, and which is challenging it in a very, very decisive way. So these are the similarities, but I think the dynamics are quite different because of the number one, the tribal kind of structure of society, which doesn't really exist in the same way in Syria, for example, even though you have tribes and you have different kind of religions. Mali is Muslim, like in almost 100% of the population is Muslim. So the dynamics are mainly ethnic in Mali.
Anwar, if I could ask you to expand a little bit on the regional response to what is taking place in Mali. We know that ECOWAS states have their particular position. I mentioned the African Union standard position on not recognizing unconstitutional changes of government. You've talked about these groups being seen from a counterterrorism lens, even though they are native to this region. And then you have the formulation of the AES, but you also have dynamics in relation to Morocco, Algeria, Mauritania. And one thing that stood out for me in the last few weeks is an alliance that's been created between the military junta and the Moroccans, and this abandonment of the idea of Western Sahara having decolonization from Morocco. But also because when I look at Morocco, I see parallels and close association to Israel and the utilization of weapons from that side. How would all of these dynamics in this very complex part of the world relate to what you've spoken to us about today?
It's a very good question. It's a very complex question. I think the region is made up in a sense of weak states that are largely unable to craft their own way. So they have shifting interests, they have overlapping interests at times, but overall, realistically, none are really able to put an end to the rebellion. So this is a conflict that's been going on for over nearly 15 years now. So it started as a tribal rebellion with very little means, but yet none of the countries, whether locally or internationally, have been able to crush that movement. So I think very much like Syria and Afghanistan, the countries will have to contend with the reality at some point if the kind of JNIM and FLA alliance gain even more strength and takes over, they'll have to deal with that reality. As we've seen in Syria, a lot of short-term interests, short-term alliances that really do not match the kind of the depth of the movement which the Malian regime is facing.
So if these groups are more tribalistic, and then you have the ideology of wanting to create a state on the basis of Islamic Sharia, will that still be within the lines that have been drawn by France, the colonial lines? Or would we be looking at a movement that goes across state lines? And then how do you see the excitement and euphoria around a character like Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, and the idea that these military movements in the Sahel are going to be the next wave of decolonization for Africa? Where does that fit into the dynamics? Are we just looking at Mali within a confined space, or are we looking at something on a broader scale?
The point that you're making is very important with regard to the objectives of the JNIM in particular. Are we talking about Azawad? Are we talking about the entire Mali? Or are we talking about the entire region? Because it's a group that expands and extends beyond the borders of Mali. As I mentioned, especially in Niger and Burkina Faso. What it seems is that the JNIM would be ready to kind of limit its demands to Mali and to the borders of Mali. And as I mentioned, its ally, the FLA, is ready to accept kind of sovereignty or autonomy of the Azad region, which is the northern part of the country. Now, the question regarding Ibrahim Traore and the decolonization of West Africa, I think definitely what has happened is that France has completely lost almost completely lost its sphere of influence in West Africa through the rise of military juntas in West Africa. But I think it's difficult to talk about decolonization. It certainly is a loss for France, but the fact that that Mali and neighboring countries have to rely on Russia to defend themselves makes it a bit difficult to talk about decolonization, even though, of course, Russia does not have the same history in the region, does not have the same interest, and does not have the same kind of methodology. However, again, the local population in central Mali, in northern Mali, sees these military juntas in a very different light. They see them as repeating the same cycles of discrimination, of corruption, of violence, and of bringing foreigners to kind of oppress the local populations. So I think there's a difference of perspective. So many in the Global South movement saw the rise or the kind of France being expelled from West Africa as a positive step. But perhaps I've neglected that the impact of Russia has not been positive for the local populations. And as I've mentioned, we're talking about massacres, we're talking about torture, we're talking about extrajudicial killings, and so on and so forth.
Before we go on, Anwar, I want to remind our audience that there is an opportunity to raise your questions, raise your hand, or put your question into the chat, and we're happy to pose that to Anwar. But you're talking about, Anwar, the human cost. You're talking about the impact of the torture and human rights violations. Are these being recorded in any way? Is there a way of having any reparations towards this, holding anyone accountable? Or would this be too dangerous territory to get into because there are so many different groupings and every one of them may be responsible or may be found guilty of those kind of atrocities?
And that's an excellent question because it's very much an understudied region, an understudied conflict. And as I mentioned, it's been going for 14 years. And in Syria, in other parts of the world, you did have some sort of count of the victims of the crimes. But for the Sahel region, it's almost non-existent. And if it does exist, it's local efforts that barely make their way into the kind of Western media or Western political circles. So besides local reporting, besides especially reporting on the massacres in villages, there's very little. There's very, very little. Yes, of course, there's danger, but there's danger in every war-torn country. So I don't think it's much of a reason to not have the same scrutiny when it comes to a violation of basic rights and basic laws of conflict.
We have another question, Anwar. Are there other opposition groups or individuals who may not be part of the armed groups that you've described? How has the junta's response been to those groups? And is there any formal opposition within Mali as well?
So I'm not too familiar with the local kind of southern Malian politics, but yes, there are some voices, especially that wants dialogue. So those voices are isolated, they are demonized by the military junta, and their efforts is really undermined. But when it comes to the northern part of the country, obviously Iyad Agrali, who is the head of the JNIM, is very much a power breaker, and he's got a very interesting history. At one point, he was posted in Saudi Arabia as part of the embassy for Mali. He had dealings with numerous countries because he was such an important player in the northern part of the country, in the Tuareg movement. So really, the armed movement, I think, is so vast that the key players are there, and those that have the sway are those who have guns, whether it's in the central government or among the kind of rebellion movement.
Let's talk a little bit about the strategy that JNIM seems to have adopted recently in a blockade of fuel. Seems like this is a strategy many countries around the world are adopting, but they've blocked fuel from going into the capital of Bamako. Is this something new in their arsenal instead of the ground fighting? Are they looking at applying economic pressure to the government? And what kind of impact do you think this would have?
So, yes, we've seen the JNIM in the past few months blockading trucks of fuel, but also of other necessities. And it's really a display of strength and kind of quote unquote non-violent method of pressurizing the central junta and the central government, and showing that they can bring the capital to its knees if they want to do so. Now, interestingly, they've also demonstrated kind of an openness to listen to the local population, even in the capital, where some of the locals reached out to the group, saying that their loved ones and their families needed some medicines and medical equipment that was being barred from entering the country, and the regime allowed this material to enter. So we can see that even though there is an attempt to force the central government to bend its knees, there's also a demonstration of trying to appease and appeal to the local population in southern Mali.
Anwar, I have another question from Uncle Ismail. He will pose that. Uncle Ismail?
Thanks very much, Zinat. I think we're running out of time. But just are other countries such as the UAE, Qatar, Saudi, Egypt, perhaps even Turkey, are there sort of any involvement behind the scenes or trying to facilitate talks between the different parties?
There hasn't been open involvement in that way. There might be. What's very interesting is that the efforts of dialogue and negotiations are very much local. As I mentioned, there's some, first of all, is the openness of the regime itself to negotiate and to dialogue. There's also imams that actually the regime said that they would agree to enter into discussion with them. And there's politicians from the south that are, so it's very much driven from the grassroots. Of course, I think the other countries, they can have a role to play in facilitating this dialogue, but I think the local efforts is what's to be noted, and I think it's a good thing, because the people are able to, if they are allowed, at some point the nation is able to discuss among, and that's been the message actually of Janim. That say we're all the sons of the nation, and we should be able to discuss among each other, which is a very unexpected message from a group which is obviously has an allegiance to Al-Qaeda, which is classified as terrorist, but which is kind of extending a olive branch to the central government with a very strict conditions, but still it's an olive branch.
Thank you, Anwar. I think, Uncle Ismail, I can actually mention that this week there was a conversation between the Minister of State of Qatar and the military junta, and it appeared that they seem to be giving support to the junta. It's something that I think we need to certainly watch. Anwar, before we completely wrap up, let's go with the last question about the humanitarian impact of this conflict. You mentioned the levels of poverty in Mali, and you've also mentioned how the situation in Mali is really off the radar for the rest of the world. How would a humanitarian response be crafted for a region like this? I'm sure it's deeply necessary, but also from a donor perspective, donors seem to have massive fatigue because of the multiple conflicts and humanitarian crises around the world. So how would you address that in the situation in Mali?
So when it comes to the humanitarian situation, there's 40,000 IDPs, internally displaced people. There's also over 100,000 people that fled across borders into neighboring countries, especially Mauritania and also Algeria, to escape the violence, especially in the north. Now, again, it's a region which is largely ignored. There's malnutrition. Over 1.5 million children under 5 are suffering from acute malnutrition. There's been a number of epidemics, but
I think, if I may, from the chat, Uthman posed the question, what is the likelihood that the insurgency could be used by France as a way of getting back at regimes that have driven them out of West Africa? Interesting question to be posed. Anwar, are you back?
yes, I am.
Okay, so I was putting forward the question that's in the chat, which is, what is the likelihood that the insurgency could be used by France as a way of getting back at the regimes that have driven them out of West Africa? And it may also be important to mention we see France making overtures to countries such as Kenya with Macron's recent visit as part of an attempt to regain influence over Africa. Kenya not having been a French colony, but certainly finding itself wanting to align with some very dubious international actors. So if you could address that as the last question before we wrap up, inshallah.
I think France has made its stance very clear towards the kind of regime that it has classified it as terrorist. For over 10 years, it hunted down its leaders, its fighters. It opposed any sort of negotiations, except when it comes to some prisoners and hostages. And so France has a kind of this position of non-negotiation. And yeah, of course, it's unhappy with the situation, as we've seen with Syria. Western countries are at times able to kind of swallow their pride and enter into conversation with those that they once labeled as terrorists. But with Mali, we're not there yet. And the position of France is very much that this is a war against terrorism, and that it needs to be fought as such, and that the Malian government or the Malian Junta has undermined the different efforts to defeat the rebellion.
So as we come to the end of tonight's discussion, I want to express my thanks to Anwar for his thoughtful, nuanced and challenging presentation. I think that one of the things that I'm certainly leaving from this chat with is that the crisis can't be understood in simplistic binaries. It's far more complex than that, and the solutions to it would also have to adopt a similar trajectory. It's something that we on the African continent certainly need to keep an eye on very, very closely. So on behalf of CIRA, I would like to thank Anwar Mafil for sharing his insights and his expertise. But I would also like to extend my deep gratitude to all of you as participants. You've been so patient, especially when we've lost Anwar now and again due to the connections, and you've stayed with us right to the end. So I hope that this has been an engaging discussion and that you'll join us at CIRA for future discussions. My deep thanks to Zakira for managing and for putting this together, and for the entire CIRA team. We hope that this is not going to be the last of discussions of its nature, and we encourage all of you to join us in the future. Jazakallahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.